In 1964, the fastest car Ford ever built for the drag strip looked like something your neighbor would drive to church on Sunday. Picture pulling up to the staging lights at your local strip, and in the other lane sits this plain white two-door sedan. No stripes, no badges screaming performance, nothing flashy. Just a quiet Fairlane with a strange bulge on the hood. But when that engine fires up and rattles every window in the staging lanes, you know right away that whatever is under that hood does not belong in this car. And you'd be right. Ford had taken their biggest racing engine and crammed it into the smallest chassis it would physically fit in, and the result would turn super stock drag racing on its head. They only made 100 of them. This is the story of the 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. Before we get into the Thunderbolt itself, you have to understand what was going on in the early 60s. The pony car didn't exist yet. No Mustang, no Camaro, nothing. The big three were fighting the superstock war with full-size cars. Ford had their Galaxy, Chevy had the Z11 Impala, and Chrysler was running 426 Max Wedge Plymouths and Dodges. Ford had been climbing the ladder with the Galaxy, moving from the 390 to the 406 and eventually the 427 by 1963. But the Galaxy had one problem it couldn't shake: weight. Even stripped to the bone, those cars sat around 3,400 pounds, and the class minimum for 1964 was 3,200. When everyone is making similar power, that extra 200 pounds is the difference between a trophy and a trailer ride home. So Ford stopped bringing a heavyweight to a middleweight fight. The Fairlane was Ford's midsize car, and dry, it tipped the scales at roughly 3,000 pounds. That meant with fuel, a driver, and a bigger engine, it would still land right around that 3,200-pound class limit. That was an edge the Galaxy simply did not have. Now, the idea of stuffing a 427 into a Fairlane didn't come from nowhere. Back in 1963, Bob Tasca over at Tasca Ford in Rhode Island had already built an experimental 427 Fairlane, sometimes referred to as the HEMI 1. From what I've been able to piece together, that car caught the eye of the Ford brass in Dearborn, and the whole Thunderbolt project grew from there. Though, I'll be honest, details on that prototype are a little thin depending on who you ask. Ford was deep into Lee Iacocca's Total Performance campaign at this point, and they contracted a company called Dearborn Steel Tubing to handle the actual Thunderbolt conversions. These modifications were far too involved for a standard assembly line. Partially built Fairlane 500 bodies were pulled from the line and shipped to Dearborn Steel, where the real transformation happened. And NHRA rules required Ford to build at least 100 cars in the same spec to qualify for superstock competition. So that's exactly what they did. So what made the Thunderbolt so special? Well, it starts under the hood. The biggest engine the Fairlane was designed to accept from the factory was a 289 small block. The 427 FE is a much larger engine in every dimension, and fitting it into that engine bay was a nightmare of packaging. The shock towers had to be notched to clear the cylinder heads, the battery got relocated to the trunk, and a custom set of tubular headers had to be fabricated and routed in some very creative ways just to clear everything. When it was all buttoned up, you could barely fit your hand in there. This was not a car designed for weekend maintenance. This was a car designed to win. The 427 itself was a center oiler, and I want to be clear about that because a lot of people, including some pretty well-known videos out there, call it a side oiler. It wasn't. The side oiler block didn't come along until 1965. The Thunderbolt used Ford's high-riser cylinder heads, which flowed extremely well for the era, and it ran a compression ratio of around 12.7 to 1, though I have seen documentation that puts it anywhere from 11.6 to 13.3, depending on the source and the specific build. It had a solid lifter cam that was, to put it politely, very aggressive, and sitting on top were two Holley 4-barrel carburetors fed by a Ram Air-style intake system. And here's one of my favorite details about this car. Those inboard headlights on the front of the Thunderbolt, they aren't headlights at all. They're 6-inch diameter air ducts that funnel fresh air directly to those carbs. Fake headlights hiding cold air intakes. In 1964. I mean, come on, who doesn't love that? Officially, Ford rated this engine at 425 horsepower, but that number was almost certainly sandbagged. Manufacturers back then routinely underrated their racing engines both to keep insurance companies from gouging buyers on premiums and to game the NHRA's power-to-weight classification system. Realistic estimates put it well over 500, and some people who've dynoed period-correct engines claim numbers closer to 550 or even 600 horsepower. So let me know in the comments, what do you think it really made? Behind that engine, the manual cars got a Borg-Warner T10 4-speed with an aluminum case. And no, it was not a top loader. That's another one of those details that gets mixed up all the time. The automatic cars received a specially reinforced Lincoln-based Cruise-O-Matic 3-speed. Both sent power through a Ford 9-inch rear end with a Detroit locker and gearing in the 441 or 458 range. That 9-inch was really the only rear axle tough enough to take the kind of beating these cars were going to dish out at the strip, weekend after weekend. Now, the drivetrain was only half the story. Dearborn Steel went through every inch of the car to strip out any weight they possibly could. The stock seats were thrown out and replaced with lightweight Bostrom bucket seats. And I should point out, a lot of people say those were Econoline van seats, but they weren't. They were aftermarket Bostrom units. The floor got nothing but a thin rubber mat. No radio, no heater, no sound deadening, no armrests, no sun visors. They even deleted the passenger side windshield wiper, because honestly, why would you need a wiper for a passenger who's not there to race? On the outside, the fenders, doors, and that iconic teardrop hood were all fiberglass. The window glass got swapped for lightweight Lexan. They originally wanted to run fiberglass bumpers too, but the NHRA said that wasn't allowed, so they went with aluminum instead. The base car was a Fairlane 500 two-door post sedan, not a hardtop, which is an important distinction. The first 11 Thunderbolts came painted vintage burgundy, and the remaining 89 were finished in Wimbledon white, the same white, as a fun side note, that later showed up on the Shelby GT350. All in, 100 cars were built, with roughly half getting the manual and half the automatic. So did all of that actually pay off at the strip? It absolutely did. The Thunderbolt was about as close to a rocket ship as anything Ford had ever bolted a license plate to. In period, these cars were running low 11-second quarter miles on a consistent basis, with the fastest time I could find from the era being an 11:08 at 128 miles per hour. In 1964, that was flat out insane for anything that technically still had a VIN. Gas Ronda, racing out of Russ Davis Ford in Covina, California, had his car repainted from the factory burgundy to a bright poppy red, and he tore through the competition that year. He won the inaugural Hot Rod Magazine Championship and went on to capture the NHRA Top Stock Points Championship for the full 1964 season, putting Ford right on top. But I want to be fair here, because this is where a lot of coverage on the Thunderbolt gets the story a bit sideways. The Thunderbolts dominated the first half of the 1964 season, no question about that. But by the time the U.S. Nationals rolled around at Indy, Chrysler had unleashed their race HEMI, and the dynamic shifted. At those Nationals, Roger Lindemood and his Dodge Color Me Gone won top stock, beating the factory Ford entries. Butch Leal took the SS class. The Thunderbolt earned the season-long points title, and that is a fact, and Ford should be proud of it. But by Indy, the Mopars had an answer, and the fight was a lot closer than some people like to admit. From the records I could find, which get a little thin once you go event by event, the second half of that season was much more competitive than the first. The Thunderbolt only lived for a single model year. By 1965, the landscape was shifting fast. Manufacturers were cramming big engines into even smaller, lighter platforms, the kind of cars that would eventually become pony cars and funny cars. The Thunderbolt, as brilliant as it was, became a product of its moment. Ford did come out with the 427 SOHC Camry in 1965, and that thing was an absolute beast, but they never offered it in a production vehicle. A Thunderbolt with a Camry under the hood would have been something else entirely, but it just never happened. Today, a genuine numbers-matching Thunderbolt is one of the most sought-after collector Fords on the planet, with prices routinely in the multi-six-figure range at auction. And if you want proof the car still has fight left in it, look up Ray Paquet. He still races the factory prototype, serial number 1 in NHRA Superstock class, and that car is running mid to low 8-second passes on modern tires. Over 60 years later, and it's still winning its class. If you ask me, a few $100,000 for a genuine piece of motorsport history that you're almost never going to see twice? That doesn't sound like the worst way to spend it. Let me know down in the comments how much power you think that 427 really made. Was it 500, 550, 600, or more? And which would you take if you could pick one, the Thunderbolt, a Z11 Impala, or a Max Wedge Mopar? I'd also love to hear from anyone who actually saw one of these run in person, whether it was the Thunderbolts, the Color Me Gone Dodge, or anything from that era. Otherwise, though, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, as it really helps us out. I will see you all in the next one, enthusiasts.